Welcome back. So, the title of this mini lecture is 1968. Let's get into it. So, as you read more about the complexities of sport and gaming cultures in American life, the era of 1968 is an important one. Not just because of kind of the initial growth of American distance running or sort of this kind of thing, but also because of, again, just the multifaceted nature of what's going on in the country at the time. So it's important to, kind of mention, to kind of note. Um, One, you've got, of course, the Vietnam War. So at the end of January 1968, the Tet Offensive begins. And this was a broad based effort on the part of North Vietnamese forces to attack American forces and South Vietnamese forces across South Vietnam. Now, the very fact that this attack was able to occur really gave pause to a lot of people, both in the U.S. and globally, that maybe the U.S. government or the effort, which was being sort of sold as being one thing, wasn't going the way perhaps that they had been told. And this led to quite a rise of protests. And this is kind of our second point. So, broadly, 1968 is an era of the rising global counterculture, rising protest, and political unrest. So, again, the counterculture is something that is often in US history circles tied more to sort of American experiences, but there's quite a great deal of historical scholarship that makes it clear that countercultural protests existed all over the world, from, of course, Japan, from in France, in Paris specifically, to even Mexico City, with horrible incidences occurring in the days leading up to the Olympics that year in Mexico City. So the arc of those protests, I think, is an important part of understanding, kind of where things are. An example of those protests, of course, is going to happen in Chicago. So after the Tet Offensive, the American president, Lyndon Johnson, announced he wouldn't be running for re-election. And what ended up happening was you have a Democratic National Convention, which becomes, in the city of Chicago, a highly politically charged event where you have young people from around the country who kind of head to Chicago to have their voices heard. And the mayor of Chicago, in particular, is not that open to the city and the surrounding area becoming a space for sort of these kinds of protests and forms of political expressionism. And so you have quite a lot of violence in the streets of Chicago. And there's a lot that goes on there. But again, the protests in Chicago, in this time period during the convention, really, again, are a reflection of these ongoing sort of, multi-factored nature of what's happening in America at the time. This also brings us, so we've got Vietnam, protests, and certainly Chicago. We also need to acknowledge the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was killed, who was murdered in the early part of 1968, killed by James Earl Ray. Now, King's death, in particular, as well, contributed to a series of protests and unrest around the country, really highlighting that while there had been efforts at rights struggles and legislation, efforts for equity, that there was quite a lot of unrest and anger that was still ongoing in the country. Another sort of element for us to consider with sort of life in 1968 is going to be the election. So in 1968, the presidential election will see Richard Nixon winning this particular election. Now, Nixon had been the vice president under Dwight Eisenhower, and what Nixon really represented was kind of, at the time, the ascendancy of a new form of conservatism. And in some ways, Nixon is running kind of as this candidate who is seen as kind of a response to the growing unrest of the 60s, a response to the rights struggles. He's sort of a backlash to some of this. And so Nixon is going to, I believe it was near a campaign stop, like, the way the story goes, Nixon had seen a poster or an advertisement that had said, "Bring us together." And so then Nixon kind of takes up this charge of using this as a term or as a phrase for his campaign, and really sort of sees himself as this candidate to kind of bring everyone together, with realities running against sort of some of what had been being achieved in the era of the Great Society and sort of this kind of thing. But again, this discourse between conservatism and counterculture really is certainly on display in the election, and certainly in the days to come in 1968 in America. Thank you very much.